10-year-old Luna stood frozen in the doorway of the principal's office, a small, gray silhouette against the harsh fluorescent lights. On her left cheek sat a dark, blooming bruise that drew every adult eye in the room, but she didn't seem to notice it. Her knuckles were white, clutching a tattered, spine-broken journal to her chest like a shield. The room was heavy with silence. To the teachers, this was defiance, another nap in class, another refusal to listen. But if you looked closer, you wouldn't see a rebel. You would see a child running on fumes. The question wasn't why she was sleeping. It was what lived inside that battered book that explained the mark on her face. She took a breath, adjusted her grip on the only thing that mattered, and stepped inside. To understand the moment in the doorway, we have to look at the path she took to get there. The journey to the principal's office is usually a walk of shame, but for Luna, it was the only time the world felt quiet. Her sneakers squeaked against the polished linoleum, cutting through the low roar of the cafeteria. Other students moved in packs, worrying about math tests and kickball teams. Luna walked through them like a ghost, separated by a thick pane of glass. While they calculated grades, she calculated how many hours of alertness she had left before her body shut down. She passed the trophy case and stopped in front of the frosted glass door marked Administration. She pressed the buzzer, a loud, angry sound of judgment, and pushed the heavy wood open. The secretary pointed a manicured finger toward the inner office without looking up. Luna knew the way. To the staff at Oak Creek Elementary, Luna was a file of documented failures. The incident that led here had happened during fourth period math. The room had been warm, the heater rhythmic, and her body simply gave out. When Mrs. Gable, a teacher who prided herself on patience, touched Luna's shoulder to wake her, the reaction was explosive. Luna launched herself backward, chair screeching. "Don't touch me!" she yelled, a terrified reflex of a soldier in a trench. In her world, a sudden touch meant a medical crisis. That reaction stamped her as a behavioral issue. Mr. Henderson sat behind his desk, rubbing his temples. He saw a child who didn't care about rules. He didn't realize she was too busy managing a crisis to care about algebra. He sighed, closed her file, and looked at the tattered notebook she clutched. He stood up, walked around the desk, and closed the door. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. While Mr. Henderson waited for an explanation, Luna's mind drifted back to the apartment that held her captive. It wasn't a home. It was a medical ward where she was the only doctor on call. Her mother was battling the ravaging aftermath of chronic illness. Some days she could brush Luna's hair. Most days she was a statue of pain. The bruise Mr. Henderson stared at wasn't from a playground fight. It was a battle scar from a rescue mission 2 nights ago. Her mother had tried to walk to the bathroom and collapsed. Luna found her crumpled on the kitchen floor. She didn't call for help. Sirens meant questions, and questions meant separation. Instead, she wedged her small shoulder under her mother's arm to lift her. But physics is cruel. Her mother's knees buckled, and they went down together. Luna took the impact against the nightstand to save her mother's head. She didn't cry out. She just scrambled back up and pulled until her mother was safe in bed. The bruise was the receipt of that failure, a mark of love, not violence. To understand why Luna collapsed on her desk during fourth period math, you cannot simply look at a lack of sleep. You have to look at the specific, terrifying architecture of the night that preceded it. The exhaustion that Mr. Henderson mistook for teenage rebellion was actually the physical debris of a battle fought in the dark hours before the first school bell ever rang. It wasn't that Luna stayed up late, it was that she never went to bed at all. The crisis began at 2:14 a.m. Luna knew the time because the red digital numbers on her bedside clock were the only light in the room when the sound woke her. It wasn't a loud crash this time, it was worse. It was a low, rhythmic keening sound coming from the other room, a noise that didn't sound like her mother or even like a human being. It sounded like an animal caught in a trap. Luna didn't grope for a light switch or rub the sleep from her eyes. She moved with the instant, heart-pounding clarity of a first responder hearing a siren. Her feet hit the cold floorboards before the second moan had finished. When she reached the bedroom, the smell hit her first, a thick, sickly sweetness of fever sweat and old medicine. Her mother was tangled in the sheets, her body bowing backward in a rigid arch. The fever had spiked. It wasn't just a temperature, it was a fire that seemed to be burning her from the inside out. Luna touched her mother's forehead and pulled her hand back instinctively. The heat was radiant, terrifyingly high. Her mother's eyes were open, but they weren't seeing the room. They were darting wildly, fixated on invisible terrors in the corners of the ceiling. When Luna whispered her name, her mother didn't respond. She just thrashed, mumbling words that slurred together into nonsense. This is the moment that breaks a child. To look at the person who is supposed to be your protector and see them reduced to a confused, suffering stranger. But Luna didn't have the luxury of breaking. She had a job to do. She ran to the kitchen, filling a bowl with cool water and grabbing the last clean washcloth. She returned to the bedside, climbing onto the mattress to hold her mother down with the weight of her own small body. She began the ritual she knew by heart, wringing out the cloth, pressing it to the burning forehead, whispering soothing lies that everything was going to be okay. For the next 4 hours, Luna waged a war against the thermometer. She couldn't give more medicine yet. The schedule in her head said it was too soon, so she had to use physics. Cool water, fanning the air, lifting her mother's head to sip water through a straw, drop by agonizing drop, praying she wouldn't choke. Her arms ached from the strain of supporting an adult's weight. Her eyes burned with a grit that felt like sand, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. This is where the journal became her lifeline. In the chaos of the night, memory fails. Fear makes you forget. Did she give the pill at 10 or 11? Did the fever go down or up? So she wrote it down. She sat on the floor by the nightstand, the tattered notebook balanced on her knees, writing by the light of a street lamp filtering through the blinds. She logged the data with the precision of a nurse. 2:45 a.m., burning up, won't drink. 3:30 a.m., shaking, stopped. 4:15 a.m., finally sleeping. The handwriting started neat, but degraded into jagged scrawls as the night wore on. These weren't diary entries about crushes or dreams. They were the vital signs of her only family. By the time the gray, indifferent light of dawn began to leak through the curtains, the crisis had passed. Her mother was asleep, breathing deeply, the fever broken. Luna sat on the floor, shivering in her thin pajamas, her back against the wall. She hadn't eaten since lunch the day before. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but there was no food in the house that didn't require cooking, and she didn't have the energy to stand at the stove. She looked at the clock. 6:30 a.m. A normal child would have crawled into bed. A normal parent would have called the school to say she was sick. But there was no parent to make the call, and Luna knew the rules of the system. If she missed too many days, the truant officer would come. If the officer came, he would knock on the door. If he knocked, he would see. He would see the bottles, the mess, the mother who couldn't wake up. So Luna stood up. Her legs felt like lead pipes. She went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face, trying to wash away the gray pallor of the night. She put on her uniform, buttoning the shirt over a chest that felt hollow. She brushed her hair, though her arms were too heavy to reach the back, leaving the knots that the teachers would later whisper about. She grabbed her backpack and the journal. She never left the journal. It was the evidence of her survival, and walked out the door. She wasn't going to school to learn. She was going to school to perform the role of a normal girl, a disguise she wore to keep the world from burning down her house. Mr. Henderson's voice cut through the memory like a knife, sharp and sudden. "Luna, I asked you a question." The bedroom vanished. The smell of sickness was replaced by the smell of floor wax. She was back in the chair, the journal under her hand, the secret locked in her throat. She blinked, the image of her mother's feverish face still burning behind her eyelids, and looked up at the man who thought she was just lazy. The air in the principal's office felt different than the air in the hallway. It was stiller, heavier, pressurized by the expectation of an answer. Mr. Henderson leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight, a sound that seemed to shout in the quiet room. He wasn't a cruel man. He was simply a man trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. He looked at Luna, really looked at her, and his gaze snagged, as everyone's did, on the bruise blooming across her cheekbone. It was an ugly mark, purple and yellow, the kind of injury that demands a story. To him, it looked like the aftermath of a playground scrap, a shove near the lockers, or perhaps something rougher happening in the neighborhood. "Luna," he started, his voice dropping to that confidential, "I'm on your side" tone that adults use when they think they can coax a confession out of a child. "We can't help you if you don't talk to us. That mark on your face, did someone hurt you? Did you get into a fight this morning?" The question hung in the air, absurd and miles away from the truth. A fight? Luna almost laughed, but the sound died in her throat. A fight would have been easy. A fight meant another kid, a scraped knee, a band-aid, and a handshake. How could she explain that the bruise was from the corner of a nightstand she hit while trying to catch a falling adult? How could she explain that the fight was against gravity and sickness and that she had lost? She said nothing. She stared at the scuff mark on the toe of her sneaker, focusing on it until her vision blurred. Silence was her primary defense. She had learned over the last 6 months that words were dangerous things. Words were traps. If she started talking, if she opened the dam even a crack, she might not be able to stop. She might scream about the fevers. She might cry about the empty refrigerator. She might accidentally reveal that she was the only one in charge. And once the adults knew that, the machinery of the system would start turning, grinding up her fragile life. So she sat like a stone. Her silence wasn't defiance, though she knew that's what Mr. Henderson saw. It was containment. She was holding herself together with sheer muscular tension. Mr. Henderson's patience, frayed by a long week, began to snap. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. He saw a stubborn girl refusing to engage. He saw a problem that refused to be solved. "Luna, look at me," he said, his voice hardening, shifting from the counselor to the administrator. "You were sleeping in class again. You yelled at a teacher. You're failing 3 subjects. And now you sit here and refuse to explain yourself?" He waited. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching out. Tick, tick, tick. It was the sound of time running out. "If you won't talk to me," Mr. Henderson said, reaching for the black landline phone on his desk, "then I have no choice. I'm going to have to call your mother." The words hit Luna harder than the nightstand had. Call your mother. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her chest. It wasn't the fear of getting in trouble. It was a specific, terrifying logistical fear. She knew exactly what would happen. The phone in the apartment was on the kitchen counter, loud and shrill. Her mother had finally fallen into a deep, restorative sleep at 6 a.m. If that phone rang now, it would shatter the silence of the house. It would wake her. Waking her meant confusion. It meant the pain returning before the next dose was ready. It meant the adrenaline of the noise might spike her heart rate again. Luna's imagination played the scene out in horrifying detail. The ringing echoing in the empty hallway, her mother stumbling out of bed, disoriented, reaching for the phone, maybe falling again. The thought of that sound, that intrusive, violent ringing, was unbearable. It was a threat to the patient's recovery. "No," Luna whispered. It was the first sound she had made. Mr. Henderson paused, his hand hovering over the receiver. "Excuse me?" "Don't call," she said, her voice trembling but louder this time. She looked up, her eyes wide and desperate. "Please, don't call her. She's sleeping." Mr. Henderson frowned, confused by the strange plea. "It's 10:30 in the morning, Luna. If she's sleeping, she can wake up to discuss her daughter's suspension." He didn't understand. He couldn't. He thought sleep was a luxury, a choice. He didn't know that sleep was the only medicine they had left. He lifted the receiver. The dial tone buzzed, a flat, angry drone. Luna's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She couldn't let him make that call. She couldn't let the outside world break into their sanctuary. The walls were closing in. The suspension didn't matter. The grades didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was protecting the peace she had fought all night to secure. She had run out of silence. She had run out of places to hide. Her hands, shaking violently now, moved of their own accord. She couldn't explain it with words. Her throat was too tight, choked with exhaustion and fear. But she had the evidence. She had the log. She tightened her grip on the tattered notebook, her knuckles turning white. This book was her shield, but now it had to be her voice. She realized with a sudden sinking clarity that she had to show him. She had to let him see the inside of the war zone. It was the only way to stop his hand. It was the only way to silence the phone. Luna didn't scream. She didn't run for the door. Instead, she moved with a sudden, decisive calm that seemed far too old for her small frame. She released her grip on the notebook, the cardboard cover warm from her hands, and slid it across the polished mahogany desk. It moved with a soft hiss, stopping just inches from Mr. Henderson's hand. The gesture was a challenge, a plea, and a surrender all at once. "Read it," she whispered. Her voice was thin, barely audible over the hum of the ventilation, but the command was absolute. "Read it before you call." Mr. Henderson froze. The receiver was still in his hand, the dial tone buzzing like an angry insect. He looked at the girl, seeing the desperation in her eyes. Not the desperation of a child trying to avoid punishment, but the desperation of someone trying to prevent a disaster. Slowly, he placed the phone back in its cradle. The click echoed in the room, signaling a temporary truce. He reached out and touched the journal. It felt fragile, the spine held together by layers of yellowing tape. He expected to find the usual artifacts of 5th grade. Doodles of hearts, angry scribbles about unfair teachers, maybe a secret note passed in class. He flipped the cover open, the stiff cardboard cracking slightly. The first page wasn't a diary entry. It was a log. His eyes scanned the top line, expecting words, but finding numbers. October 14th, 8 p.m. to 100.4, 10 p.m. to 101.2. Meds given. He frowned, turning the page. The handwriting was Luna's. He recognized the loops of her G's from her failed spelling tests, but the content belonged to a triage nurse. November 2nd. She can't keep water down. Crushed the blue pill in applesauce. She spit it out. Mr. Henderson felt a cold prickle at the back of his neck. He flipped forward, faster now, the pages crinkling in the quiet office. The entries became more erratic, the handwriting messier, as if written in the dark or by a hand shaking with exhaustion. He saw the timeline of a ghost story unfolding in ink. It wasn't just a bad night, it was a chronicle of a slow-motion collapse. Then he stopped. He landed on the pages dated for last night. The ink was fresh, the pressure of the pen heavy, digging into the paper. 2:15 a.m. Fever came back. She doesn't know who I am. 3 a.m. She tried to walk. She fell. I tried to catch her, but she was too heavy. I hit the table. She is okay. I am okay. Mr. Henderson's breath hitched. He looked up at Luna, his eyes locking onto the bruise on her cheek. The fight he had imagined, the roughhousing, the playground accident, it all dissolved. He saw the scene clearly now, a 10-year-old girl, 80 pounds soaking wet, throwing her body under a falling adult to cushion the blow. The bruise wasn't a mark of violence, it was a mark of sacrifice. He looked back down, unable to meet her gaze. The final entry on the page was written in large, jagged letters, the ink smeared as if by a sweaty palm or a tear. 4:30 a.m. I am afraid to close my eyes. If I sleep, I won't hear her stop breathing. If I sleep, I become an orphan. The silence that filled the room now was not the silence of discipline. It was a vacuum. The air seemed to have been sucked out of the office, leaving Mr. Henderson lightheaded. The administrative wall he had built between himself and this student crumbled instantly. He wasn't a principal anymore. He was a father, and he was witnessing a level of terror no child should ever know. He felt a physical ache in his chest, a heavy, crushing weight of realization. He had been judging her for falling asleep in math class while she was fighting a life-and-death battle every single night. He slowly closed the book. His hands were shaking slightly. He looked at Luna, seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. The gray skin, the frayed sweater, the absolute exhaustion that radiated from her bones. She wasn't defiant. She was drowning. Luna saw the change in his face. She saw the anger drain away, replaced by a horror that looked a lot like pity. She didn't want his pity, but she needed him to understand. She stood up, her legs trembling, and delivered the truth that had been stuck in her throat for months. "I'm not sleeping because I'm lazy," she said, her voice steady and hard, cutting through the heavy atmosphere of the room. "I'm sleeping because I kept her alive all night." The silence that followed wasn't the silence of judgment anymore. It was the heavy, reverent silence of a room where the truth had finally landed. Mr. Henderson didn't pick up the phone to call the police, and he didn't dial the truant officer. Instead, he reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a tissue, and handed it to her. Then, he picked up the receiver again, but this time, he dialed a different number. He called the school counselor, Mrs. Vance, and his voice was low and urgent. He didn't ask for a disciplinary file, he asked for help. For Luna, the change in the room was physical. The air pressure seemed to drop. The terrifying possibility of separation, the monster she had been fighting off with silence and secrets, didn't materialize. When Mrs. Vance arrived, she didn't come with handcuffs or accusations. She came with a sandwich from the cafeteria and a soft wool blanket from the nurse's station. They didn't treat Luna like a suspect. They treated her like a survivor of a shipwreck who had finally washed ashore. Mr. Henderson sat on the edge of his desk, no longer the intimidating authority figure, but a man humbled by the strength of the child before him. He realized that while he had been worrying about test scores, she had been worrying about survival. The adults moved quickly, but they moved with a new kind of gentleness. They orchestrated a plan that wasn't about punishment, but about rescue. They arranged for a home health aide, someone who could take the night shift so a 10-year-old girl didn't have to listen for the sound of breathing in the dark. They contacted social services, not to tear the family apart, but to build a scaffolding around it so it wouldn't collapse. Mr. Henderson looked at Luna, who was now wrapped in the gray blanket, her eyes heavy, the adrenaline finally fading. He told her, clearly and firmly, that she wouldn't be separated from her mother. He promised that the goal was healing, not division. He explained there were programs for families in crisis, resources that didn't involve foster care but involved support networks. He validated her fear, but then he dismantled it with facts and promises. That afternoon, Luna didn't go back to math class. She didn't have to pretend to listen to a lecture on fractions while her mind was 3 miles away. She was allowed to curl up on the small sofa in the counselor's office. For the first time in months, she closed her eyes without fear. The journal sat on the desk nearby, closed. Its job was done. It was no longer a secret log of terror. It was just a notebook again. The burden hadn't disappeared completely. Her mother was still sick, and life was still hard, but the crushing weight of carrying it alone was gone. Luna realized she didn't have to be the doctor, the nurse, and the guard dog anymore. She could just be a daughter. She could just be a child who needed a nap. The bruise on her cheek would fade, turning from purple to yellow to nothing, but the shift in that office would last. She had walked in as a problem to be solved, and she walked out as a person to be protected. The teachers would no longer see defiance when she stared out the window. They would see resilience. They would understand that her behavior was actually a language of survival that none of them had been fluent enough to read until she forced them to look at the translation written in ink. We never truly know the weight another person is carrying, especially when that person is a child standing quietly in a hallway. Luna's story reminds us that sometimes the most difficult behavior is actually a desperate cry for help disguised as silence. The tattered journal is closed now, resting on a shelf, no longer a burden, but a testament to a daughter's fierce love. If this story reminds you that behavior is a language we need to learn to read, please share it to help spread empathy. Subscribe for more stories of quiet resilience.